Hello, Tar Heel Nation. We are back. It is great to be back as the National Championship Tar Heels brought back their sixth championship back to Chapel Hill. And it's taken this long just to kind of get my wits about me to be able to talk about it on the podcast. So it is Friday as I record this here, and I also brought along someone that watched the game from Chapel Hill, got to rush Franklin Street, and can tell us about that experience firsthand. We have a returning guest on the podcast, Megan Arrington. Welcome, Megan. It's great to have you back. See, I still can't even talk. I'm too excited to talk about the championship. But I just looked. Actually, it's been since November, I think, when you were on the podcast. So it's longer than I intended to have you back on, but it's great to have you back.
Glad to be here.
So let's jump right in. I want to thank everybody that's watching, listening, however you're taking the podcast. Thanks for the support that you guys have, that you give, and appreciate all the sharing out. And I as the season comes to the end here, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I just wanted to thank everybody for listening to the podcast this season. This is definitely not the end. We'll move to kind of monthly podcasts in the off season, but just did want to thank everybody for listening and supporting the podcast. And let's jump right in. Before we even get to stats, just kind of overview of the game. Megan, I'll let you go first. Just as you were watching, not even jumping into stat stuff, but what was just kind of the overview of the game that you have as you think back?
Well, it was a pretty ugly game, I think, on both sides. I don't think really either team was shooting well. I don't know the exact percentage, but we hardly made any 3-pointers. Our field goal percentage wasn't good. Our free throws were terrible. So it was kind of an ugly game. And I thought so on both sides. But I thought our defense was pretty good. I think it was a good team win. I mean, we needed every single one on the team to do it. Barry stepped up big finally after, being in a little bit of a slump. But Meeks continued to be strong with his rebounds. Hicks stepped up. I thought it was overall a good team win, however, a slightly ugly one.
Yeah, and that's, of course, what everybody's talking about. And it's not going to be remembered as one of the great Carolina teams. It's not going to be remembered as one of the great national championship games. Probably last year, unfortunately, is going to be remembered as a much better game, and people will remember obviously the ending. This one is kind of a weird ending too, because it looked like it was going to come down to the buzzer, and then all of a sudden it's just like there's 2 turnovers and the game was pretty much over. So kind of unique in that way. And yeah, it wasn't even really a great game to watch if you're watching without a team in it. Like you said, really ugly game. A lot of, just no flow to it with the way the fouls would be called and people were in foul trouble, and both teams being in the double bonus with like 10 minutes left in the game. Like you said, an ugly game, but obviously we don't care about that. And that's the thing too. Like, I'm in Tennessee and there's a lot of Kentucky fans around here, and either they're on the side of, they bring up, Meeks being out of bounds on that one play, that the reffing was so bad and so in favor of the Tar Heels, or they're like, I don't want to hear about reffing, because if it was about reffing, then Kentucky would have beat North Carolina. And so there's all that stuff going on about that. Of course, we have plenty of examples where it was kind of bad calls against North Carolina. I think Roy mentioned in one of his press conferences about the air ball 3 that wasn't tipped, but they changed it to being tipped, and then on that very play, Niles Williams-Goss hits a 3. So that was obviously a big tournament event. So, like I said, not gonna be a great game to remember as a basketball game, but one will, of course, never forget as Tar Heels and as fans there. You mentioned, the field goal percentage, like you said, and there's lots of tweets out there about only the 3rd time in the season the Tar Heels had been out rebound, and the only one they won. It was like the 3rd time they'd shot below 36% or something, and this is the only one they won. So it kind of shows that kind of determination, the grit, whatever you want to call it, that the Tar Heels had to take this. I don't know. You said you didn't have stats in front of you, so I don't want to put you on the spot too much. But is there something that kind of stands out to you as far as what put us over the top? Got us this win, or something that really held us back from maybe even playing a lot better in this game.
I know we only had 4 turnovers, which was huge. We took care of the ball for the most part. Some games we have turnovers in the teens, so I thought that helped us a lot. I think that what it comes down to is the team was so close last year, and they needed to win this one, and they didn't want to go through what they did last year. And I think that determination and grit, like you said, kind of put them over the edge and really, really helped them out that way.
Yeah, and I think I had tweeted out before the game, or I told somebody anyway, like, can you imagine if we win 2 national championship games in a row? Like, it would have been horrible to lose in the Final Four. It would have been horrible to lose Kentucky, all those things. But if we would have lost in the national championship the second, like, I can't even imagine.
I couldn't take it.
Can you imagine, like, these guys, Joel and Justin and Kennedy and Isaiah, and I couldn't even imagine what they would. Again, I can't even imagine what that'd be like. I can't imagine what they would have felt like. But yeah, jumping into the stats a little bit, we talked about overall as a team how poorly we shot. Joel Berry led us with 22 points, had 6 assists in this game. Justin Jackson, 16 points, although he shot really poorly, was 0 for 9 from the 3-point line, 6 for 19 overall. Isaiah, kind of a bounce back game for him, not spectacular, but 13 points, 9 rebounds. Kennedy kept it up with the rebounds. I think they said this is like his 6th or 7th game in a row with double-digit rebounds. He had 7 points, 10 rebounds. And then Theo was Theo again in this game. 6 points, 9 rebounds, couple assists, a steal, block, just kind of all over making plays. And then Tony with a few more minutes in this game, 5 points and 7 rebounds. So Joel Berry is named the most outstanding player. There's been some kind of question on that. Where do you stand on that?
He played a great game, but that game really focused in the national championship. But I think that Meeks, overall, I think without Meeks we wouldn't have won it. I mean, he played big in the national championship game, even though he didn't score a lot of points. But that Oregon game was just insane out of him, and I don't know. It's really hard to say. I do think that Meeks deserved it, but I can value Berry getting it as well.
Well, and the only I don't say excuse, or the only justification that I've seen from it is I think that the voting for the most outstanding player had to be in with like 2 minutes left in the game, which doesn't really make sense, because especially in a tight game like that, like, there's so much that could have happened. I'm guessing they gave one for each team, so that then whoever won that team's player got the most outstanding player. But but even, like, to your point, up to that point, in that game, sure, Joel was probably our MVP of that game, or most outstanding player. But as far as the Final Four as a whole, I agree that Meeks definitely should have won. Like, we probably aren't in the championship without Meeks, 25 and 14 or whatever it ended up as. And again, going back, I don't want to harp on the refs or the fouls too much, but it kind of played into that, into those circumstances with the style that we play and the style they play. Like, it's both teams trying to pound it into the post and get the other team in foul trouble. And I mean, it just worked. It just worked for both teams. And so we had kind of an ugly game in that sense. But I'm totally on board with Meeks probably winning. Again, I don't have any problem. It's not like I don't like Joel Berry and think he shouldn't have got it.
Right.
But there's been a little bit of a movement to get Kennedy Meeks his jersey up into the rafters, because obviously with most outstanding player, that's one of the stipulations to get up there. So if anybody from North Carolina athletic or basketball department is listening, of course they know already, but it sounds like we just have to get Kennedy Meeks voted as the MVP of the tournament or something like that, and he'll get his jersey up there as well. And of course, we have some of those Tar Heel fans that think, because of what he did the first 3 years or whatever, he shouldn't be up there. and then of course there's people on the other side that say the starting five of any national championship team should all get their jerseys retired. So I'm assuming you would be okay with Meeks going up into the rafters, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think he stepped up big when he needed to. You know, he did have a little rough first couple years, but he stepped up big the tournament, and I think he played like he wanted it, and that was great.
Yeah, and now I forgot where I was going to go from there, but I guess that's okay. It must not have been that important. Looking a little bit at their stats as far as Gonzaga and who we played and won or beat, we said we shot only 36% from the field. We did hold them, and you had mentioned our defense as well, to 34% shooting. They were 42% from three, which is okay, but not spectacular, and forced 14 turnovers against them. So yeah, kind of an underrated defense for this team. I don't think when we look back, we look back at the other championship teams and especially the 05 with Jackie Manuel and stuff, how much they stepped it up defensively and shut people down once they got to the tournament. I believe that was the team too where Roy took off the rims of right before the tournament. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I'm not sure there.
It was one of them. I believe it was the 05 championship. One of the practices right before the tournament, Roy took off the rims of the baskets, and they had a whole practice just focusing on defense. But I think people talk about the defense a little bit more with that team. The 09 team was so explosive on offense. If they had any defense, they were going to win. And I know Ty Loss even set the record for steals in the national championship game that year. And I don't think this team's going to get the credit that they deserve defensively, but they did really step it up. You don't win games shooting 36% from the field, and I think it's like 15% from three. We're 4 for 27 from the three-point line, unless you have good defense. And like you said, too, taking care of the ball, 4 turnovers. Yeah, that's kind of the stats we have for the game. Hopefully the reffing doesn't get focused on too much in this game. And I heard some national guy too say he didn't think the reffing was that horrible. All the fouls that were called were fouls. It just made the game pretty ugly to watch and slowing the game down. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what people outside of Chapel Hill and North Carolina think of this game as they think back. But let's transition now into a little bit of our experience watching the championship. I was here at home. My kids were in bed for most of the game. And it was just me and my wife watching the game. You had a little bit different experience. Just go through where you were, what the atmosphere was like, and all that.
Yeah, I was on Franklin Street, took off work, went to Chapel Hill. My dad actually went down to Chapel Hill and was on Franklin Street in '77 for the Marquette UNC game. And he's always told me if I ever had the opportunity to go, that I should. And I went last year, but obviously that didn't pan out how he wanted it to. So I gave it another shot, and it was incredible. I'm so glad I did. And I think one of the best parts about it was just being surrounded by fellow Tar Heel fans. And, you go to your bar or you go to a restaurant or wherever you're watching it, and you're surrounded by complete strangers. But by the end of the game, you're more like a family. And that was just great to be a part of. I mean, the people I were around, I didn't know them at all. But by the end, we were hugging and crying. And it was just a great family atmosphere to be a part of. And, afterwards, rushing Franklin Street was also incredible. It's really indescribable. But along the same lines, you just saw so many Tar Heel fans, kids as young as 5, adults as old as 85, all experiencing the same thing you are. So to just soak that in and just kind of be a part of that was just amazing.
Now, were you there for the semifinal game? Were you there for the whole Final Four?
Yeah. I actually went down Saturday. I told my boss, I said, look, if Carolina wins Saturday, then, I'm going to take a vacation day on Monday and Tuesday. And she approved. So I was out of there, and I went down Saturday and watched the Oregon game. And once we won that, I knew I was going to be there.
And was that the same as last year? Were you there for the Final Four and the championship game?
No, last year I did not go for the Final Four, the Syracuse game. I couldn't that day. I just went down Monday, so maybe that was the difference.
There you go. See, it was your fault last year.
Yeah.
So talk about the differences, and I don't know where you watched it last year when you were down there, the championship, but just the extreme differences of how you left the bar or the Smith Center or wherever you watched it last year compared to this year, rushing the Franklin Street and the craziness that entails.
Yeah, well, last year we got down there a little late, so the place we were going to watch it, they were actually maxed out, so they turned us away. So we just had to find somewhere with the TV, and we ended up going to timeout. So the atmosphere there wasn't as great, and then obviously when we lost, it was just like a punch to the gut, and people were out on Franklin, more drinking to drown their pain. But this year, the atmosphere was great. Like I said, I was at a bar full of Tar Heel fans, screaming, yelling, crying, you name it. There were so many emotions there, and just to rush Franklin afterwards and everyone going to the same spot was incredible. Night and day difference, and I'm glad it was.
Yes, we all are, of course. And I was just thinking, I'm usually not one that can watch championship games, but even like Tar Heel games, UNC games with other people, unless they are Carolina fans. So
right.
I don't have many of those around here in Tennessee, so I don't get the chance to watch games with people too much outside of my family. But it's been crazy, even here in Tennessee. Like, of course, all week I've been wearing Carolina shirts and hats and stuff. But the people that have recognized that they won the championship surprises me. Like, I'll get an old lady in the grocery store like, "Oh, I bet you liked that game, didn't you?" And it's it's just amazing that even though they're not necessarily Carolina fans, but they recognize and they appreciate what happened. You're from North Carolina, correct? And I can just imagine what it's like going around there with other Tar Heel fans, and like you said, just the bond that you have with somebody that you don't know because of the shirt or the hat you're wearing. And it speaks to, of course, the power of sports. It speaks to the Carolina family, what Dean Smith and now Roy Williams have built and continued. It's just amazing. I don't know, is there any interactions, especially that stick out to you either on that night or since that you've got because of the championship?
One that kind of meant a lot to me that was special, and I didn't get the guy's name, but there was a guy sitting next to us at the bar, and he came by himself. So he was focused on the game. He came by himself, and he didn't say much during the game. But at the end, I kind of glanced over there right when we pretty much knew we were going to win, and he had tears coming out of his eyes. And that was just incredible to see. I mean, he's probably been waiting on that moment for obviously years, and just to see that was kind of really special. Yeah,
so now you've fulfilled what your dad told you to do and get to Franklin Street on the championship. I guess the only thing you have left now is to be at an actual Final Four and watch Carolina win a championship in person.
That's next on the bucket list.
which is amazing. I went in 2009 when we won, and we didn't have necessarily the money to buy the tickets. We were way up, like the second to last row in there, but just to be in the building and see One Shining Moment and see obviously Tyler Hansborough and all those guys celebrating is something, I don't think I'll ever forget this championship. And I was sitting at home on the couch watching, but to be there in person is something awesome, and that every Carolina fan should be able to experience if at all possible. Of course, we can't take championship games for granted, Final Fours for granted. Even though the past 2 years we've been a little spoiled and obviously made 2 of them in a row, we can't expect that every year. But looking ahead to next year a little bit, what's kind of your thoughts on who do you think is going to go pro or who should go pro or any of that?
I think anyone's going to go pro, it should be Justin Jackson. Just the way he's improved from last year, it's a tremendous change. He went into the draft last year, got to learn, what he needed to work on. He came back out and worked on those things, and I think he improved. So, if anyone's going, I think he should, and he deserves it. I would love for him to come back, but I would be, extremely surprised if he did. Other than that, I don't really think anyone's ready. I support their decision to maybe enter the draft and see what they need to work on and come back out. But I don't think that anyone else should stay in. Tony Bradley's already said that he's going to test the waters. I think that's great to learn what he needs to work on, but he's definitely not ready. I don't think we've heard about Joel yet. I think he should come back, but I think he might declare and test the waters as well. And I've heard a few, people talk about Pinson maybe testing the waters, but I definitely don't think he's ready. But other than those, I don't see it.
Right, and obviously we already lose Meeks and Hicks and Britt, to graduation. So I'm sure they'll put their names in and be in the draft and see what happens. But right now, from what I've seen, and I don't follow the draft boards or anything too closely, but Justin is like right on the fringe of being a lottery pick. And if he had, good workouts, obviously he could move up or, even to be first round. A lot of guys will go nowadays. But like you said, Tony's already declared without an agent, so he can come back. And really, it makes no sense not to declare, kind of like John Calipari was saying last year, the whole team's going to be in the draft and then, go see what they say and come back. So
right.
for Theo and for Joel, like you're talking about, I'm almost surprised, maybe because they aren't going to make a big announcement about it, but I would be more surprised if they didn't kind of go and do what Justin did last year. Go, what do I need to work on kind of thing. And then where am I at? And then make a decision from there. But I always kind of thought if we won it, Joel Berry would probably leave. Like you said, I would gladly take him back.
Yeah.
If he does leave, he brought a championship to Carolina. You can't be upset at the kid to follow his dreams and stuff. But of course, we'd welcome him back and bring him back with a much better chance of doing something special next year with him in the rotation. So that's next year. This past year, I actually just looked up right before we started podcasting your prediction. I went back to the predictions podcast before the season started.
Yeah.
And I didn't write mine down in the description of the video, so I don't even know exactly what mine was. I have an idea, but I'll have to listen to it to get mine. But yours was 28-10 for an overall record, and us making it to the Elite Eight. Just to remind you, I didn't know if you.
Oh, I remember. I said that I hope that we make it farther, but that was going to be my prediction. So I'm glad I was wrong.
Right, and to be fair, I know I said the Elite Eight as well as where we'd make it. I don't remember. I think I maybe said 7 or 8 losses in the season, but. Just for people listening to this, next week I am going to do a podcast and go through all of those predictions that people gave me and give people credit who called us. Maybe they were just being homers and saying we get the championship. I don't know. Maybe they knew. But I am going to go through all of those next week at some point. So if you're not subscribed, subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, on iTunes, any podcast app that you have. It should be there. And give it a review so that more people can find it. Maybe one day we'll even get Megan to subscribe to the podcast.
Maybe.
And then before we did leave, I guess before I even get to that, Megan, is there anything else we need to talk about as far as the championship game? Anything that you can think of to add that I left out? I don't want to take it away from you at all. If you had something else that we should talk about.
No, I don't. I just think that it was crazy how it was really back and forth the whole game. And then the last, minute or so is when we pulled ahead. Isaiah came up with that huge shot and, to put us up by 3, I think. And then with the Meeks block and the Jackson dunk that, I felt pretty good at that point. So it's just crazy how it was so close. Then all of a sudden, we pulled away. So it was a great win. And
Yeah, and probably better for all Tar Heel fans that it went that way instead of having to come down to a buzzer beater again or something like
yeah, my heart couldn't take it.
that. So yeah, before we did leave, obviously thank you, Megan, for coming on, but also throwing it out to your shirt. I believe that's a championship shirt you got on there.
It is. Let's see. Yeah.
So I do have an affiliate link with the Fanatics website. If anybody has not ordered their championship stuff, I'll put a link in the description of this video right at the top. It won't cost any more money from you, but if you order from Fanatics and click on that link first, I get a little bit, and we'll pour it back into the podcast to try to make it better every week and every year. But other than that, we've come to a close of another season for Tar Heel basketball. I'm definitely not ready for it, especially the way it ended. I'm ready for October to get here, start talking about Late Night with Roy and a bunch of worthless scrimmages and exhibition games that don't mean anything, but we'll be ready to talk about it. But just a reminder, this podcast will go to kind of once a month podcast through the off season, and then we'll come back with weekly ones next season. Of course, Megan, you're welcome back anytime to come talk about Tar Heel basketball. But that's all I got for you. Any parting words, Megan?
No, here's to a great season, and go Heels.
All right. Thanks for coming on. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Like she said, until next time, go Heels.